In the United States, popular sovereignty applies to all 50 states, meaning that each state must govern with democracy, creating no restriction whatsoever on voting, as well as total political equality for all genders and races. America was ultimately founded on the people's want for freedom, which led to the idea of civil liberties, including speech, religion, press, assembly, and the right to petition the government. And it in turn created our nation's government systems and democratic policies we still use today. Today, citizens play a huge part in the continuation of our democratic society. Around the world, there are wars and conflict taking place because of religion, greed, and so much more. Luckily, in the US, we have our liberty, which makes us free to make choices about what we do or what to say. Thus, we can choose our own religion, and we hold the right to protest. In the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, it reads, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." So, what does America's country being democratic mean for citizens today? It means that you respect and obey all laws. Speak your voice, and it also means that all citizens at the age of 18, regardless of gender, race, sexuality, or other attributes, has the right and duty to register to vote. After registering, the citizen should participate in all future elections to assure that their voice is heard and to keep the democratic representative system of government relevant.
The legislative branch is the branch of government that makes the laws. It's made up of two houses: the House of Representatives, which is made up of 435 directly elected representatives from states based on their population. And the other house is the Senate, made up of 100 directly elected senators, two from each state. That way, there's equal representation among each of the states. Term limits, there are no term limits, but terms for representatives are 2 years, and terms for senators are for 6 years. The legislative branch is the product of the weakness of the federal government under the Articles of Confederation. The founding fathers wanted a strong federal legislature, which there hadn't been previously, and it caused all sorts of problems. Powers such as taxation, running of the military, and other checks and balances were all designed because of the weaknesses that they had seen under the Articles of Confederation. One of the most important checks and balances that the legislative branch has is the ability to override a veto with a two-thirds overriding vote. That was added because when the founders created a stronger executive branch, they didn't want it to be too powerful. The executive branch includes the president, vice president, the cabinet, and tons of other agencies and boards. The executive branch is the branch of government that is supposed to enforce the laws. It has the power to veto the decisions made by the legislative branch, and it is used to nominate Supreme Court justices and department heads. Things like the Department of Defense, Agriculture, Commerce, stuff like that. That's all what the executive branch has power over. Presidents are elected by the Electoral College rather than a direct democracy system, and they serve up to two different 4-year terms. They don't have to be in a row, but they can never serve more than two. Just like the legislative branch, the executive branch was created after the Articles of Confederation at the Constitutional Convention. The executive branch was created this way because the Articles of Confederation didn't have an executive branch. Veto power was given for checks and balances against the legislative branch, but as discussed earlier, that veto can be overridden. The executive branch was much weaker prior to the FDR administration, which saw the Great Depression and World War II. FDR's New Deal program expanded the power of the federal government greatly, and today the federal executive branch is significantly stronger than it used to be. This is known as the modern presidency versus the classical presidency. The last of the three branches of government is the judicial branch. It has three levels: the district courts, the appeals courts, and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the entire country. All levels hear cases regarding the constitutionality of laws, not just other little civil issues such as traffic tickets or other charges. The Supreme Court has 9 justices that are appointed by the president and voted on by Congress. They serve life terms, but they can resign if they so wish. Just like the other two branches, the judicial branch was created at the Constitutional Convention after the Articles of Confederation. It was crafted to solve the weakness of the judiciary under the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles, there was no national judiciary. It was all reliant on states, so there was no way to settle disputes between states, which there were many. The Supreme Court originally had 6 justices, but this changed several times and many were added, and it finally settled at the current 9 justices in 1869. Recently, there have been pushes from more progressive elements in the government to expand the Supreme Court, which would bring it to a new level that hasn't been seen for such a long time.
Linkage institutions. The United States government has adapted to linkage institutions that connect citizens to federal government. These institutions are typically used as information channels that allow citizens to express their concerns and needs to local representatives. Linkage institutions also provide a means for citizens to choose their elected representatives and allow them to connect with other citizens who may share similar interests or beliefs. Linkage institutions. Media. Media platforms are a commonly used method of communication between citizens and centralized government. Examples of media linkage institutions include television, social media, the internet, and other various forums, including personal or political blogs. Media is a way for political candidates to inform citizens of their candidacy, of their views, and boost their platform via campaign ads. Once an official is elected, media informs citizens of their actions, whether good or bad, and allows citizens to publicly express their opinion on blogs or social media platforms. Linkage institutions, interest groups, and political parties. Interest groups allow people to join forces with those alike who seek to change certain policies or who share a similar concern for pressing issues. Interest groups can take action for their cause by collecting funds for a candidate that supports their views, persuading others to vote for said candidate, or attempting to influence the laws that are passed. Political parties are the most divided linkage institution. There are 2 United States political parties, Republican and Democratic. These 2 parties have a broad spectrum of centralized ideologies, and their members often have conflicting views of how government should run and how citizens should be treated under government. The goal of these parties is to keep government in their favor by keeping the party in the majority, so laws and policies coincide with their ideals. This can often lead to disagreements among the 2 parties. Linkage institutions, elections. Elections provide a way for citizens to participate in government by choosing their elected representatives, who in turn will be a channel for the needs of their districts. However, this institution can be very faulty, and representatives often spend their time working hard to get reelected. In many cases, members of the elected Senate and Congress fail to contribute effectively on a national level with policy changes. Instead, they participate in gerrymandering or changing voting districts to better suit their political view for their own political gain, which often results in low voter turnout. Linkage institutions. Conclusion. If the United States lacked any of the mentioned institutions, our society would be slowed down considerably. In order to maintain a system that works both quickly and effectively, it is imperative that we have open communication channels that allow both participating parties, citizens and government, to exchange information. We as citizens are able to contribute more in our systems if we are allocated reliable information and the ability to express our wants and needs. However, it is also important for all individuals, whether civilian or representative, to uphold a high moral standard if we are to effectively achieve equality and peace, as stated in the Constitution.
The next thing that we'll be discussing is voting rights. So when you're looking at the role of citizens in the government, voting is one of the more prominent ways for citizens to be involved. Even though voting has been an aspect of American democracy since the conception of the United States, not everyone was granted the right at the time. Pretty much at the time, it was only white men that were able to vote. And even though that wasn't explicitly stated in the Constitution, there were a lot of barriers put in place to say otherwise. So voting is a way for citizens to directly influence the ways of the country and voice their opinions in an organized and official manner. Currently, there is elections a couple times a year, and there are the biggest ones, presidential elections and federal legislative elections happen in November every 2 or 4 years, depending on what is being voted on. And there are 4 voting amendments, each one granting a different demographic the right to vote, kind of going back to the last thing where, only white men were originally able to vote. That has changed because of the 4 voting amendments. Now we will discuss the 4 voting amendments. The first one, the 15th Amendment, says that the right to vote cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Basically, this says that black men and former enslaved men could vote. The 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote because it says that it determines that the right to vote cannot be denied based on sex. The 24th Amendment removes the poll tax and allows individuals to vote without having to pay, and this gives the lower class the opportunity to vote. And the 26th Amendment decreases the voting age from 21 to 18, and this gives young people in that age range the ability to vote. Another way that citizens can be involved in the United States government is by directly involving themselves and associating themselves with the government. And the best way to understand this is by understanding the levels of government. So the conception of the United States government separated the government into 3 different levels: the federal, state, and local levels. There were multiple reasons for the separation, one being because different areas and regions had different needs, and enforcing the same exact laws and systems everywhere would not be effective for those different groups of people because the United States is such a diverse and widespread country. However, another reason was because it allowed the role of citizens to expand. Having these different levels of government gives citizens more opportunities to be involved and run for office, while also allowing for influence over laws that more directly relate to and impact them. Not every citizen wants to be a senator in Washington, D.C., but they can get involved at the state or local level and make just as much of an impact on their day-to-day lives while not having to make as much commitment. This also allows for more people to be involved in the government and more representation for everyone. So the final way that I'm going to talk about how these citizens can be involved in the U.S. government is through the act of protesting. This gives individuals a voice and it allows them to make the beliefs of themselves and others widely known. But protests can come in acts big or small. Just a couple examples are sit-ins, marching, and burning draft cards during the Vietnam War. Going back to sit-ins, that was specifically in the civil rights era. But I think this is especially prevalent in today's society, especially with the Roe versus Wade thing. There have been a lot of pro-choice marches going on. There were a lot of Black Lives Matter marches going on for pretty much any cause in current culture and society. There's a march and a protest for it, and that's a great example of seeing how citizens are exercising their First Amendment right, the right of the freedom of speech, but more specifically, the right to protest.